Welcome to the third of our Arts Dinners online. My name is Bronwyn Davies and I'm the Coordinator of Cultural Services for Scenic Rim Regional Council, and I'm here on Mununjali country here at the Centre Beaudesert, and our co-host is Michelle Blair, coming to you from Toowoomba in southwestern Queensland at the Empire Theatre. Thank you all for joining us tonight. But first, before we kick off, may I introduce to you Aunty Gerry Page from Beaudesert. Over to Aunty Gerry.
Okay, hello.
Hello.
Hello. In Jingri Wali, Mununjali jargon, it's welcome to Mununjali country. My name is Aunty Gerry Page, a member of the traditional elders Mununjali Aboriginal group. And tonight we would like to pay respect to our elders that have passed, those that have shared their spiritual connection, their songs, their dance and their stories, custodians of our waterways and our land and the sacred sites, onto the present elders who continue those stories and continue those connections, and who work tirelessly in the community and sharing it not only with our own people and reconnecting, but also our borders and to our wider community. We also respect our emerging elders who have willingly and passionately taken on the custodianship of that knowledge and those stories. We also want to thank Scenic Rim for your kind invitation, and thank the arts for their inclusion and welcoming us to do welcome and acknowledging that. So we just thank you very much. I hope you have an amazing year.
Thank you, Aunty Gerry.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Aunty Gerry. Earlier today, we were out on Mununjali country, and we're just going to show you a bit of a video of some of the mob there and some memories of Ilbogan Lagoon.
This place here is the Ilbogan Park, and across the road is the Ilbogan Lagoon, where our families and our old people used to fish there. And that was always the story of the bunyip. And over this way is a place where we used to live in an old tin hut, where auntie and uncles and families would come and go. And we'd go down fishing at the Logan River. At the Logan River there, where we catch all the fish, and the Logan River was our source, our livelihood. It was our backyard, you may as well say. Our playground, where we'd go and we'd swim and we'd fish and we'd bathe in the water. And also the water was our drinking water at that time. And so we never had no running water or anything. Everything was built by hand. It was a place where we were safe. We always felt safe there with our auntie and uncle. And this is a place where my brother and sister, we always go when we are stressed out and in need of to get back to country. And this is where it is, at the river, our safe place.
The song is called Garamian Army. It's a welcome and farewell song to all tribes down the south east coast of Queensland. Yeah, Garamian Army. Oh, Garamian Army, Jojo Mokbe Ono, Garamian Army, Garamian Army, Jojo jam up here on.
But right now, let's head over to the Empire Theatre and Michelle Blair. Over to you, Michelle.
Thanks, Bron. Thanks also to Aunty Janice and the dancers. It was a great way to start the discussion tonight on placemaking. I'd also like to acknowledge the Aboriginal parties whose songlines traverse these lands we meet on today, the Western Waka Waka, Guyabal and Jarrawa peoples, and pay respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. So if you've just tuned in, welcome to the Arts Dinner Online. We are streaming to you tonight from Zoom and YouTube Live. I'm Michelle Blair and I'm your South West Queensland Regional Arts Services Network Officer, and I'm on stage, next to the stage at the Empire Theatre in Toowoomba. You can post your questions throughout the night, and the team at Arts Fronts, who are behind the scenes making this happen, will get that to us to make sure that we can ask our guests as the evening goes on. Arts Front and their team are working on this project with us from locations around southern Queensland, with everyone in self-isolation and observing physical distancing guidelines. If you want to catch this again later or share with your friends or community, go to YouTube Live, where you can find, which you can find at the Live at the Centre website, www.liveatthecentre.com.au, and Arts Front's web address as website as well. Right now we go back to Bron in Bow Desert.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks, Michelle. Tonight's panel discussion dives deep into placemaking and issues and opportunities around fabrication. I'd like to introduce our guest for tonight. Ben Tupas is an arts producer and multidisciplinary artist based in Toowoomba. And since 2018, he has been the artistic director of the Lit Festival Stories in Light, a biennial public arts festival that shares the local stories through light-based art. As an artist, he works in the areas of video, photography and graphic design, and is co-founder and member of Story Artist Run Collective, an artist-run initiative for Toowoomba-based digital artists. Welcome, Ben. Daniel Flood. Over the past 18 years, Daniel has developed and delivered a diverse range of arts, media and technology, community cultural development projects across Australia. These projects have been delivered with the government, local and state, GLAM, which is short for galleries, libraries, archives and museums organisations, and in the youth not-for-profit sector. He is currently the lead of the Applied Creativity team with the State Library of Queensland. Josh Arnold is a singer-songwriter, performer, music producer and film director with more than 20 years of industry experience, from winning a golden guitar to having his music played on TV programs around the world and played nationally on radio stations across Australia. Josh continues to produce his own music while working with schools, communities and various organisations to create original songs and music videos for his production company, Small Town Culture. Jen Mallinson has a reputation for creating three-dimensional fluid works that convey a sense of aesthetic and abstract vision out of Australian weathering steel, which is Corten or stainless steel. Each piece is unique and made by hand in her studio on the far south coast of New South Wales. She has taught at the summer art schools at Red Deer College, Alberta, Canada, and exhibited in numerous sculpture shows. She has won awards and completed several private commissions in Europe and Australia, as well as major public sculpture commission for the Bega Valley Shire Council in Littleton Gardens, and has recently been selected for Sculpture by the Sea. Welcome, Jen. David Shaw. David has an extensive career, including being a designer, maker, university lecturer and in-house designer for various manufacturers, architects and interior designers. David established Street and Garden Furniture Company in 1991 and still remains as company director. In 2008, David was made a Fellow of the Design Institute of Australia, and in 2009 he was the co-president of the Design Institute of Australia. Welcome and thank you, David. John Mongard. John Mongard has lectured at QUT and undertook research in community design and sustainable planning. He is a landscape architect in Brisbane, and the practice is focused on collaborative placemaking and has received numerous design awards, which I won't answer, from lots of letters, from the Australia Council, etc. And John has facilitated community planning in over 50 towns throughout Australia and pioneered a return to local values based in urban design. Welcome to you all, and thank you for agreeing to be part of tonight's panel. I'm going to start by asking John Mongard a very important basic question. What is placemaking? John.
Thanks, Bron. On one level, it's quite a simple question, but I was reminded 2 years ago when 5 universities came together to sort of develop a program on placemaking. We had 200 people in a workshop with that question, all the experts from the 5 different universities and designers. And I can tell you it took about 3 months to sort of work out an answer. So it's a philosophical question, but to my mind, it's quite simple. Placemaking involves spaces, it involves people, and it involves meaning. And the role of designers and artists and poets, architects, is not to make place, but to facilitate it, to facilitate the meaning for people in space. So I just wanted to show you that process of all those academics did lead to something. That was a 2-year process. There's a book called Placemaking Fundamentals for the Built Environment, and I do recommend it because I think it's the only one in Australia that deals with placemaking related to the arts, to public art, craft and design. And I think people will find it useful.
Fantastic.
Anyway, back to the topic. I thought I might sort of show you a few cartoons to try and describe what placemaking is rather than words. So placemaking.
That's a hamburger.
It's a design sandwich. So the design sandwich is culture and nature, and in between is the place. So when we play with culture and nature, you know, we should end up with place. And if culture or nature is missing, then we have a pretty impoverished sandwich. So I strongly recommend you have a sandwich with both mixed in. So that's one simple sort of little analogy. This is another one, that placemaking is actually not a linear process like a lot of design processes might imply. You know, you don't go from woe to go and end up with a place. It's more like a net. I call that a place net. The place net is a kind of a network of people and meanings and stories and spaces. And placemaking is a way of connecting those together, making a net. So if anyone shows you a design process where an artist or a craftsman is going to fit into a linear process, just tell them it's actually a net. Finally, one other way of looking at it is, again, it's not a linear process, but it's placemaking is also like a vortex. It's a kind of a rotating cyclical process that begins with looking at a whole place, like a whole town, for example, and moving through with the community and spaces in increasing levels of detail until you actually build things. And so that placemaking vortex starts at the planning and the visioning and flows downwards to the other end, which is the keeping of place. You know, when you've made it, when people have made it for themselves, they keep it and they love it. And so the value of this process, really a considered process, is to, I guess, create love in place. So there's 3 different little images. And just finally back to my original thought, the philosophical one, place is space plus people plus meaning. So, you know, there's been a lot of discussion about placemaking in recent years, particularly in local government circles, and it's become a bit of a trendy word. But essentially, we have to connect communities to their environments, and designers and artists can facilitate that creativity and meaning in place.
I think that's really interesting, that sense of, we're all looking for that sense of meaning and that connection to our places. What makes a place that you visit or a place you live resounding is all about that sense of connection and meaning, isn't it? Can you tell us what do you think are the ingredients that are necessary for making a good place?
So the hard one quite often is to bring what I call the dwellers, you know, the people that live in a place, through that process. Because if you can bring the dwellers through that vortex, from the planning down to the construction, you embed the work in their values. So you don't bring in your own values, in a sense. You kind of facilitate their values to be put into place. And so I don't really think that designers and artists and architects are actually placemakers. They're facilitators of placemaking. People make place for themselves. So communities make their places. The sense of community is actually a collective idea in your head. So when I say I love West End, which is the place where I live, and I've lived for over 20 years, it's full of rich memories and spaces. And if you asked a lot of people, what do you love about West End, you would find a lot of continuity. And so it's that continuity that we need to tap into as designers and artists, so that we create authenticity in place. Because we don't want to create Disneyland. We don't want every sculpture or every new design place to be like another place, or lacking authentic values. And so there's a trick to bring the community with you.
Yeah, okay. And so how do you bring the community with you?
Well, you've got to invent a process that allows people to be engaged and convince the folk with the money, the government people, state government and councils, to have that process. So I was thinking about some examples that I could mention to you, and I guess one that, Bron, you're close to your heart is your Main Street in Tamborine, which got improved, I guess, about a year ago, and was the outcome of a planning process, and began at that vortex at a high level, where we had workshops outside of the library. Do you remember that?
I do.
Where we just pinned up sheets of paper on the street in front of the library and asked people, what do you think what's your vision for the future of the Main Street? And how should it be in 10 years' time? And what's important about its character? And so the gathering at that big level, those hundreds of people contributed to the sense of what's the kernel of Main Street Tamborine, and the outcomes 2 years later are a series of projects that I think bed that place in its own values. And so there were poets, as you know, the local poets became a really important storytelling group that got involved, and we told those various bits of poems from different folk along the street. And then there were local artists who accompanied that sort of trail with their artworks. And there were some creative structures that reflected local meanings, for example, like the local Lepidosomia fern, which was the structure the main picnic shelter was based on a fern, which is, you know, one of the plants of the area. So, you know, people can be brought along the process, and artists and designers can be facilitators of that.
So you mentioned Main Street, and of course you'll be starting on a project here soon in Beaudesert. But what other places around Queensland have you worked on that people might visit or might be familiar with?
Well, I've been doing it for a fair while, but in Queensland, the first Main Street that I worked on was the Cleveland Main Street. But other ones that I've done are Mooloolaba, the foreshore and the Main Street of Mooloolaba, Atherton Town Centre and Innisfail, Karoi. There's a few places. Recently, well, not recently, Stanthorpe. Stanthorpe's an interesting one, actually, because the way we brought community in there was through the high school, where we gave briefs to all the high school industrial arts students to make furniture, and we effectively, they made the street lights, the benches, all the furniture was made by the local high school through a kind of mentored process, and that furniture is still there 20 years later. So that's the kind of process that I'm talking about. That, you know, there are possibilities and people are creative in their own communities. We just have to unleash that creativity.
So it's that integrating pathways for the community to become involved in the fabrication and the creation of the artworks or the poetry or the conversations that they want to have in the placemaking is important.
Yeah, and of course there's other people that have a lot more skills. There are always, you know, you need to find the local crafts people that have skills so that you can invent projects to reflect their skills. So whether it's stonemasons or craftsmen or men's sheds, quite often I work with men's sheds to, you know, you kind of invent projects to suit the skills of local artists and craftspeople. And in that way, you keep the work locally and you reflect local values and you create meaning that's relevant.
So where else are you working at the moment? You're working up in, where else are you doing some work at the moment?
Well, we've been doing work in Hobart. We ran a series of activations on main streets in Hobart. 5 different main streets had to activate their main street. Their communities and their traders had to get together and prove that they should get the money first. So they all put on a party all at the same time over one weekend. And the council folk went around looking at their parties, right? And whoever
I
had
like that idea.
Whoever had the best party got the money. So
There's a challenge.
It wasn't just about the party, but it was about the activation because they took over the street, they took over the car parks to prove that, you know, bitumen could be turned into public space. And one of them, North Hobart, their theme was Dog's Day Out. So they occupied all the car parks and brought all the dogs in the neighbourhood out into the footpath. And that was my favourite one. That one is about to get built, but the first one did get built. So that was interesting. Another one that I'm working on is Chinchilla, and the main street there has a cultural precinct where we've done a master plan for that area, and I'm hoping to embed it with local arts and crafts.
I see. That's I've got a question. No. Okay. All right. Well, that's really interesting, John. I'm looking forward to working with you on the project here in Beaudesert, and it was really interesting to work with you in Tamborine Mountain as well, because during COVID, that centre strip in Tamborine Mountain has been full of people shaking their coffees and sitting and exploring and having picnics and things like that. And it's certainly enlivened the space, and people feel a strong sense of pride about that. And there was a lot of involvement. We're currently working with community to tell the Indigenous stories more and so that's all being embedded as well. So it's really been very interesting working with you, John. Okay, so thank you, John, and we
Pleasure.
might now go to Jen Mallinson. Jen, you there with us?
Hi, Bron. Yes, I'm here.
Hey, Jen, you've made a series of large public artworks in public spaces. What did you do to ensure that these were connected and bedded into the place of your commission rather than plonk art?
Okay, well, firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands and waters of the Bega Valley Shire, where I am. It's the people of the Yuin and the Monaro Nations, and show my respect to elders past, present and emerging. Well, a public commissioned work is usually a site-specific work, so you need to research the area that the sculpture is to be placed, just as John has been speaking about. So I'd like to talk a bit about the public sculpture I designed for the Bega Valley Shire Council in 2016 called The Meeting of Two Rivers. This commission was to coincide with the opening of a new council chambers building, and it was a redesign of an adjoining central park called Littleton Gardens. The new park has a winding pathway through the middle of it that connects the main business street of Bega to the new council building, the library and the regional art gallery. And so it's a place where people sit and relax sort of in the lunch hour or have a break while they're shopping or similar. So the council wanted the sculpture to connect to Bega and the community in some way. So this could be achieved in a number of ways. You could have taken sort of a historical approach or environmental or geographical or even industrial and agricultural approach, because seeing that Bega is the home to Bega cheese, that could have been an option to go down that path.
The big cow.
A big cow. Maybe gone are the days of the big sculptures. But so in order for this sculpture to be a place marker, I felt it needed to pay respect to the traditional owners of the land and combine with geographical features of the surrounding landscape, because Bega Township is where the Brogo and Bega rivers join, and it was also a significant meeting place to the local Indigenous people of the Yuin Nation for thousands of years. It's located between two special mountains, Mount Imlay or Balawan to the south, and Byamanga in the north, and further north is Goolagot. And all these mountains have great spiritual significance to the local Yuin people. So what I'd like to do now is show you a bit of a slideshow of the sculpture while I talk about it.
Right.
So I'll share my screen and hopefully this is going to work okay. So it should start. So this is the sculpture. And that's working by the look of it. So for this sculpture, I decided to make a large contemporary work consisting of two main pieces that wrap over each other to form a kind of sculptural archway over the pathway. The curved pieces represent the conjunction of the Bega and Brogo rivers and also instill a feeling of nurturing and embracing of cultures in their form as they wrap over each other. I decided to cut patterns in the top of each arch that represent some of the local and flora and fauna specific to the area, and describe the actual the Aboriginal meeting place symbol, which was just on earlier. There it is again in the middle. I consulted with the Aboriginal liaison officer for the Bega Valley Council and was given permission to use their meeting symbol, along with other glyphs that I designed that represented the flora and fauna. So that's the sculpture at night time when it was lit. So my inspiration for the kind of patterning I used was derived from the patterns left under the bark of many of the local gums made by various sort of eucalyptus tree beetles. That's how it seemed to me anyway. And the cutouts, cast ever-changing shadows, light and shadow patterns on the pathway and unite the sculpture to the park as well. And also the planting of native grasses around the base of the sculpture and the orientation of the sculpture, because it points towards these large granite boulders in the park. which was described to me by the Aboriginal liaison officer as Tears of the Mountain, which I thought was really gorgeous. And that comes from Gulaga. They came from Gulaga, I believe. And that also further enhances the connection of the sculpture to place. Yeah.
That's really interesting. So it's certainly not plonk art. It's very considered, and it's speaking the language of the place that it finds itself in. They're very big works, Jen. Do you fabricate those? I know you work in steel, but did you do all that work yourself?
No, not on that one. The majority of my work I make myself. So I design it, plasma cut, fold, shape, weld the steel. But if it's too heavy or too large for me, I get somebody in to help me in my studio, or I have it fabricated, and then I work with fabricators through that process. And with that, the bigger sculpture I just showed you, I worked with a great crew from Queanbeyan, and I can show you some pictures of it being fabricated if you like.
Yeah, I'd love to see that.
We can go there. So hopefully this will work again. And there we go. So I supplied them with the artwork. This is the cutting patterns of their plasma cutter. So everything was all designed and cut in 6mm steel. I think this was 6mm steel plate. And then all of the pieces had to be joined together. So they're welded, and that's Cam welding there. This is one of the sides all joined together. And then it had to go through massive rollers to get the curvaceous shape. Also, held up with cranes and caught with a forklift there. As you'll see, it's massive work. So I think that piece is about 4.7 meters long. And then you end up with floppy pieces of steel that you have to put together. So we started from the bottom up, joining all sort of 4 sections together, working our way to the top. That's Cam, who's an awesome welder and fabricator. And I had so much fun working with these guys. It was just, it was a really great experience for me. And seeing it all come together was pretty cool. And so once we had each piece together, I love that shot. Looks like a big Norwegian ship or something. And that's Tommy actually inside the sculpture, welding it all together from the inside. And then once both pieces were fabricated, we, stood them up to make sure that they were in right kind of orientation, and they don't touch at the top. And then was placed on a base, which was put into concrete beforehand. And there's the guys, there's us. So that was pretty cool.
So Jen,
there we go.
When you're working with fabricators, what do you need to look out for, and how do you select a fabricator?
Well, I reckon the best way would be a recommendation by somebody, and somebody that and you can trust. That would be my first thought. And don't just go by information that's given on a website. They might say they can do all these things, and maybe they can. But I think it's really important to, there's a high level of skill and care needed when you're making artwork. It's not just kind of run-of-the-mill type fabrication. So, like if you're considering a company you don't know, ask for examples of work that they've done. Also ask for, a client list or some artists that maybe you can contact, and definitely talk to them. Don't just take it for granted. Talk to people that have actually worked with these people.
Do you think that's really important?
I do. I think that's incredibly important. I've learned a lesson, a very expensive lesson, and in time, and thought a particular person was working with somebody, and it didn't turn out to be so. And anyway, but look, if you don't know anyone, find examples of work that's similar to what you want to produce, and see if you can find out who fabricated it. So I found a footbridge in Canberra that was made out of corten with these beautiful curvaceous sides, and that's how I got to work with these awesome guys in Queanbeyan. I found a bridge.
So you found something that you liked, and then you found out who made it,
Yeah, well, I found also it wasn't just that I liked it, it was the skills that I knew I needed to fabricate my work, because rolling steel at that size, getting these beautiful curves, you know, not every fabricator can do that. It's quite specialised.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, so what's been your biggest fabricating challenge to date?
My biggest one, well, at the moment, I'm working on a sculpture for that will be installed down on Tamarama Beach in Sydney as part of Sculpture by the Sea this year. So that's something I'm working on right now. But my biggest one, I've got a huge sculpture commission coming up in the UK.
Can you tell us about that?
Well, it's about 21 metres high and it's about 13 metres at the top, and it comes down to a really small base, just over a metre. And it's going to be kinetic, hopefully, which means it will turn. It's going to be a very big engineering challenge, fabricating, logistics, and I'm really excited about it. Hopefully we'll be able to fabricate it here in Australia. That's one of the major challenges, because I don't know anyone in the UK, and I'm sure there's great people over there, but just from experience, I'd rather go with somebody that I know and can trust and can work with, and I know that they'll do a great job, and that's really, it all reflects on me as well. And so we'll be, making it in small sections that fit into shipping containers to be shipped over there. So that's all pretty huge challenge, but exciting. I'm looking forward to it.
That is quite amazing. When you have people working, fabricating things for you, do you feel less connected to the creative process and less connected to the work?
No, not at all. Making a major work, you always make a maquette or a small version of what you want to make large. And during that process, that's when all the creativity goes into it, the feel of the work and how you ultimately, want it to be. And so when you have somebody else make it for you on a larger scale, that remains. So I remain very connected to my work. Yeah.
That's incredible. Well, I wish you all the best with that, because I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure it'll be hearing about it across the world. It's not a small piece at all.
It's not a small
21 metres.
No.
Amazing.
Cool. Thanks, Bron.
You're very welcome. We'll come back to you a bit later.
Okay.
Right now, we might cross to David Shaw. David works with artists for the fabrication of a range of items in the development of major civic works all over Queensland. David, are you there? Hello, David. How do you manage the process of working with artists? Because I guess that can be challenging. David, are you there? You need to turn on your mic, perhaps.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Aha.
Yes.
Hello, David. How do you deal with working with artists?
Well, we actually generally work with a complete creative team. So John mentioned, for example, that one of his first major commissions was Cleveland's Main Street, and we worked with John on that project. And a lot of it's, there's a certain amount of logic to it. So in that instance, there's an old lighthouse. And so a lot of the ideas came from that, from something as basic as a lighthouse, because it's a shape that sort of suited the forms that we needed to do from a functional point of view and from a visual point of view. What I'd like to do is share my screen of some of the projects that we've done, including Toowoomba actually, which is one of the earlier projects that I did with the local council. Mm-hmm. So if you don't mind, I'll just see how we go with this one.
Sure.
Right, so if we go
presto.
Toowoomba. So with Toowoomba, for example, the ideas were worked around the floreal, and so that whole imagery of the festivals that are happening in Toowoomba, and so a lot of the shapes are derived from that, but they're also derived from some of the built environment. So it's a combination of those kind of kind of elements that that bring together the ideas for such a project. But we do an awful lot of different shapes. So this one here, for example, we generally work directly with a landscape architect. So that's usually a landscape architect is the main person in any particular project. And so in this instance, we're working with Shoalhaven Council with their own architect, and we've come up with some ideas that are based around the flow of sand after the tide has moved out. Fairly simple idea, semi-kinetic sculptural kind of arrangement. My background is actually fine art. And then I moved on to doing more industrial design type projects. So it's something like this one here with RPS Group. This is for Winton. It's a recent project. Project has been completed now. I haven't got any up-to-date photos of it, but in this instance, we're looking at a variety of the elements that are part of the built environment there, working very directly with the landscape architect and the local community to develop some shapes that reflect what's kind of special about that particular place. So in this instance, we've got budgerigars, we've got Winton itself, so the shape has a sense of W. We've got the Walsingham Matilda Centre, so we've built objects that you can lean against and have a yarn on. And then we've got the connection with Qantas, so come up with an idea that's sort of based around flight. So the shelter becomes kind of based around flight in two ways, because also the budgerigars are cut into the surface of the idea as well, and they're also reflected on the ground. So a lot of our ideas, there's kind of a certain logic to it. There's a practicality to the necessity to build something that's going to be recognisable by that local community, so basically our ideas evolve from something fairly specific about that particular place, and often, more often than not, though, driven by the overview of the whole group of creative people who are involved in that particular project. So something like this one here, for Rockhampton, we're not trying to challenge the built environment. We're working along the river here, and we're coming up with ideas. It's about the place both night and day. So the ideas are lightweight. We have got issues with water passing potentially through the ideas, so through the objects. So the objects have a lot of voids in them for airflow and also for potential water flow.
Can I just ask you, David, with these, do you work alongside artists to have their designs put into these street furnishings?
Indeed, we do. So in an instance like this, we'll have done a collaboration with the local community. So it'll be a broader collaboration. So it'll be a collaboration that combines ideas from the local community, from local artists, and then they're taken forward.
So if artists were submitting designs that they felt reflected something from their environment, you would work those designs up into something like the back of that seating, for instance. That would be something that you would do. And what would they need to do? Are they handing you a sketch? Are they having to submit a CAD design on a computer? Like what does the artist who might be sitting at home thinking, I think my designs would be great in my place, wherever that place might be, to be put into the built-in furniture? What do they need to do, or what do they need to think of about how they approach that partnership with yourselves as fabricators?
Well, we've worked with people in lots of different ways. You know, some people might come to us with some pipe cleaners folded up, giving us a bit of an idea, sort of like a maquette of the shape of the thing that they might want to produce. Others might do something a bit more sophisticated than that. I'm just trying to see if I can find one in Hobart, whether it's there. Oh, hang on, this one here's an interesting one. This one here is a collaboration. It's actually the landscape architect himself sees himself as a sculptor, so he actually does quite a lot of sculptural work in his own environment. And in this instance, he's just asked us to take forward his shapes that he likes and make them a viable and functional element in this particular bit of placemaking. So what we've done here is we've worked with that person as an artist. We've worked with a fabricator and an engineer to make sure that this whole device, this whole visual statement can be constructed safely. And you know, we've got to take into consideration people climbing on it. From our point of view, there's sort of other elements that we need to take into consideration when dealing with something like this.
So do you become like the conduit between the artist, the job, and all that engineering and compliance thing and the fabrication? You source the fabricators, or do you fabricate yourself?
No, we source the fabricators because if we didn't, we wouldn't really have enough flexibility to use enough different kinds of materials. So the seat here with the chest pieces, it's actually in Hobart. It's 30 years after I've done the original design for them, and they wanted a contemporary version. We've worked with the local artists. We've used a pattern there that's derived from a coral that's in the Derwent. It's specific to the Derwent.
Coral in the Derwent.
There
you go. Who'd have thought?
We've got cast elements, we've got folded elements, rolled, folded shapes. So there's a whole lot of different materials and techniques gone into producing something of that.
But it takes it out of the, I know some of the work that we've done, you know, artists have submitted designs, but you've got to think of when it's cut out, you've got to think of the positive and negative and how it's going to work in the steel and things like that. So you work with the artist to help develop their forms so that they can be, yeah. And so in a job like that, what might, because I think sometimes, you know, we think it's a great idea to have artists' work represented in the spaces that we use. But what would an artist expect to? What percentage would they get of the product? Like, what would they get paid for doing something like that?
Oh, okay. Look, it depends entirely on how much involvement they've got. We would normally probably come to some agreement. For example, with most designers get a royalty fee of maybe 3 to 5%. Could be 10%. I worked with one designer, a fellow called Alexander Lottestein. We came up with a product that was used at South Bank TAFE in Brisbane. It turned out to be a product that's actually been sold worldwide, and we go 50-50 in that product. So he contributed to some of the costs associated with developing the molds for it. It's a concrete thing. I've got a picture of it here somewhere, but it's a concrete object. Weighs 2 tons. You'd never think it was going to be a wild success, and they're sold throughout the world. Literally, they're in America, they're throughout Europe. It's been an amazing success, but it's you never really can tell. A lot of our work is very specific. So for example, here in Hobart, it's quite specific. The seats go around as an old fountain. The pattern's about a water splash thing from the fountain. There's sort of a basic logic to it. You can sort of see it there in the back of the seat. So I'm not trying to challenge the local built environment. We're trying to do something that that is going to complement it.
That's great. Thank you, David. That's really very interesting. So placemaking is not just sculptures and landscaping, it's also about storytelling. Let's now cross over to Michelle Blair at the Empire Theatre to dig a bit deeper.
Thanks, Bron. With me here at the Empire tonight, I've got Ben Tupas and Josh Arnold, and on the line we've also got Daniel Flood. So I'm going to start with Daniel. Are you there, Daniel?
Yes, I am here.
Very good. So welcome. So Daniel, you facilitate a huge range of arts projects using digital mediums. Can you give us some insight into some of these and how these new tools for artwork fabrication can help with placemaking and extending our arts practices?
Yep, I can do that. So a lot of the work that I've done over the years has explored how community and artists can intersect with new technologies, because quite often new technologies can be quite frightening, especially when you look at the sticker shock when you're looking and engaging with them. So a lot of the work we do, most recently with my work at The Edge, we've been doing we have installed a fabrication lab, which is open to the community, so we can actually work with them to create large-scale projects. And those projects can range from large-scale sculptural programs where we work with children to conceive what their imaginary worlds might look like, and then work with designers to actually take what might be a small art object and transitioning it into some kind of formal design that then can be fabricated at large scales and then installed in space, which is a response to quite often new technologies. We spend a lot of time looking down and staring at our hands. So if you look at people doing working in immersive interactive technologies, interactive artwork, quite often it's quite small work that we're sitting there soldering. And a big thing we're looking at is, how do we build communities around digital making? How do we get people to work with each other? And the best way to do that was to do large scale projects, because you can't look down when you're trying to manage a 6-meter long sculptural work. So looking at how we can create work in space, how we could then build on that work. So once you actually have a sculptural work, is inviting people who work in interactive technology and robotics and animatronics, people who work in sound and interactive installation works, people who work in projection art, and getting them to come in and then respond to the space that was created by community. So seeing how we can start with a sculptural work and then layer it up over time and see how work iterates, and see how people interact with each other as the work iterates. Because it can be very easy for one person to take control. But if you're looking at placemaking, from a lot of the work I've done, placemaking is about building the community around the place and giving them a sense of ownership in the space. And one of the best things about the best ways to give ownership in space is to get people to make stuff in the space, to fabricate part of the space. Because when they come back in and see that their work is represented in space, it's a sense that they belong. It's a sense that it is theirs, and that will bring other people back to look at it. And if you've got a long enough art process, if people can bring their family and friends in to look at it and then be further involved in it, you start to build that sense of community up, which is an interesting prospect from a facilitative viewpoint, as was brought up earlier, because where does the role of facilitator end and we transfer the ownership over to community, and how can we assist with community to create sustainable practices in this kind of area? Which, coming back to the first point, is new technologies, whether it's VR, which is like having its second bite at the apple and hopefully we'll get solid, or whether it's digital fabrication, is giving people not only the skills but access to the equipment, because that can be a big barrier, and access to the skill sets to drive that equipment and to understand how you design and fabricate for that equipment, because each of them will be very different and each of them will have their own considerations and concerns. So you have the equipment, you have the learning how to use the equipment, and the best way sometimes to learn the best ways to learn how to use that equipment is, one, using it, but in a safe and structured environment that allows you to get an understanding of it, and using it with other people so that you are not alone in the journey of learning how to use these technologies, because there's nothing more daunting than trying to teach yourself how to do something when it's you in a room by yourself with YouTube. And that works really well for some people, but for a lot of people that can be quite daunting. So if we can actually get all of those people into a space to play together, that's really quite important. And I think the new tools that we have access to, they they allow us to I've always viewed a laser cutter or a CNC machine or a plasma cutter as a medium. We sometimes confuse, we don't give it the same weight as we would a paintbrush and paints and a canvas, but it's the same kind of medium. And I think as we become, if we can work to understand what those technologies provide us the opportunity to engage with, that's kind of where it is. And someone's just commented about what co-learning, please expand. The idea is that instead, like, I can stand at the front of the room and tell you how to do this, and I can show you how to use Fusion 360, and I can show you how to design something, I can show you how to cut it out, and you'll do that. But then what do you do next? Like, hopefully if I've done my job right, I've created an experience that sparks your imagination and gives you some context. But the best way to do that work, we've found, is instead of me doing it one-to-one, is if I do that 1 to 10 and then design the engagement in such a way that those 10 people talk to each other more than they talk to me. And if there's a long enough road of engagement in there, is that the facilitators slowly extricating themselves from the process. So it becomes less about what they can learn from me and more than what they can learn about each other, because then that allows me to go do the next project. Because otherwise you get stuck in a community and you remain there. And part of the challenge is also, is that my community, or is that a community I'm facilitating with? And that, how do you exit from communities in this space, and how do you not become the linchpin of their practice, that if you remove yourself, the practice falls over? And that's why that co-facilitate, that getting people to learn together is really, really important.
Yeah, and that particular model is also so important for our regional areas, where a facilitator, having access to a facilitator for a long length of time can be a very costly process as well. So actually, by you developing a project that actually then imparts the knowledge and creates that community, it can only get stronger and grow and develop. And when you're working, and organically.
When you work with remote and regional communities, especially for city-based, it's very easy. You need to remind yourself that you're not going to be there, but it's also connecting people with local industry. A lot of this equipment, skills, and talents exist in regional communities, just not where you would think to look for them. Like some of the best sculptural work we've had done have been from welders and fabricators who have an interest in art, who do beautiful work, and us then working with them and working with an artist to come to an understanding of what the two languages are and how they can meet in the middle, and how to avoid disappointment.
There's a lot of fabricators out west that are that can do amazing work. I've worked with on a community art project with a welder who, made his bread and butter off of welding dog cages and the likes. So, but he could turn his hand to an artistic process as well. And it's a great connection to have.
My favorite thing is trying to get when you work with those community members and then they realize they are creative, because they'll be the first people to tell you on day one, I'm not creative. I'll do the welding for you, but I'm not going to engage in your creative artistic chat. And then, 6 weeks later, you find that they can quite often be transformed into the leaders of those processes, as they actually realize that, the thought that welding dog cages, some people go, well, that's not creative. It's actually, no, the amount of work that goes into being a really good fabricator is on par with being a really good fine artist. It's an acquired skill, and it requires complex creative problem solving a lot of the time. So I live in awe of fabricators, and I'm lucky to work with great ones sometimes.
That's awesome. So this leads me to, so how would you suggest artists take their ideas into this space, and what would you advise?
Someone mentioned men's sheds earlier, and looking into in your community, if there already exists communities of people who work in this space. Is there a maker space? Is there a hacker space? Is there people that meet up and already think in this space? Because most regional communities will have a men's shed, they will have a hacker space, they will have the local college or students. So if you're lucky, there's an infrastructure already there. If you're not as lucky as to have an existing infrastructure, sometimes it's about going, well, I'm going to start building an infrastructure, and then acting as the beginning of that community, which is daunting and terrifying. And There's nothing worse than sitting in a room with 12 people who are all staring at you, expecting to know what you're talking about. Having had that experience starting one makerspace from scratch, it's daunting because I didn't know the answers to the questions, but that it was the beginning of conversation. So I suppose it's that looking for existing conversations in the community. If you can't find the existing conversation in the community, how can you start that conversation in the community? And by conversation, I mean practice. And speaking with local council and the local authorities, because inevitably there is one or two really gung-ho workers that really want to see something happen, and leveraging their excitability is usually the key to success. And that's what community in Brisbane have realized when they see me coming. It's like, oh, look, we can get Daniel excited and distracted and he'll commit to something stupid. So yeah.
I mean, and that's what our Regional Art Services Network is about as well. It's so important that we create those connections and create those networks so that those conversations can actually keep evolving and hopefully turn into that snowball effect and end up either providing an opportunity or collaboratively finding an opportunity for makers.
It'd be remiss of me not to say, and libraries, like the local library networks throughout Queensland are all in some way working in this kind of area and space, and they really want to engage. So sometimes it's about hitting up the librarian saying, hi, what are you doing in the maker space? Because and it's about also understanding the languages that the different organizations speak, because librarians will use makerspace. They won't use fabrication because it's not the language in their structures that they necessarily work in. So it's about identifying what is the appropriate language that you want, that is appropriate to the community you're looking to engage in, so that you're not alienating. There's something, having a really lovely building in South Brisbane, we have to deal with threshold fear of the people coming to a lovely building and going, ooh, do I belong here? Is this where I should be? And I think a large part of how we engage those communities to overcome that, and how we get them to do stuff in space so they feel ownership of space and then take over the space and generally make awesome.
Well, having a libraries background myself, I know that those librarians would love to have a community member come in and say, this is something I'm passionate about. I'm here to work with you. How can we make this happen? So if anyone's got any ideas, I know they would love to talk to you.
And I pretty much suggest that if you go to the librarian and say that and they look scared, I will most likely have a phone call within a couple of days, either asking to explain myself why I gave you that advice, or us working with, providing them with some support around how to do it. This is what we do.
Yep, that's exactly it. Thank you very much, Daniel.
My pleasure.
So I'll cross over here to Ben. Welcome.
Hi.
It is a bit chilly here, so I'm starting to get the shakes. My feet are almost frozen. But so Ben, you're the driver behind the Lit Festival. Can you tell us what was behind the creation of the festival?
Yeah. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land here, the Guybil and Jarrawa people, as well as the Western Waka Waka people. And I suppose the catalyst for, I suppose personally, a festival like Lit is I love stories. And I know, whether you live regionally or if you live in a metro, that stories are the way that communities connect and people make sense of the places they live, and also allow them to dream into the future of what those places will look like into the future. And I suppose there was also, having lived in Toowoomba for a number of years and kind of seeing the lay of the land and how the arts operated, but also how our public space was used, I also was responding to, this point in time where regional cities are kind of coming of age. And they're like, am I going to become a big city and have the trappings or have the outward kind of facade of what that looks like, but also what does the community that is going with that change and development look like, and what do the public spaces look like? So in Toowoomba, we don't have a very big night culture. So there was stuff around changing habits around going out at night. We have a audience as well that is very family based as well. So getting people to change their habits around going out at night with their families. But also the bigger overarching thing was being able to experience art outside traditional institutions and buildings and spaces, such as, you know, we're in the Empire Theatre, which is a beautiful theatre. We've got a gallery, and we've also then got our library. And actually, these conversations have really resonated because I think in putting on a festival or having some type of activation or some sculptural outcome that benefits the community and the public, there has to be buy-in. And so there's a lot of things that kind of have had to coexist and be consolidated and also interact to get a festival off the ground like this. And yeah, essentially it is about local stories and regionalism and localism.
So, so how do you think this event has transformed the story of Toowoomba?
Yeah, I suppose we have the Carnival of Flowers. So we do have that as a big public cultural community event. I suppose one of our strategic kind of visions with the festival was that it needed to be free. So there really needed to be a low barrier to access for the community, and realizing that we also needed to have a really well thought out way that people could interact. So with a public art festival that's out in the street at night time and also unticketed, people aren't always there for the festival. So there has to be that element of people wandering in, but also people maybe engaging in a pre-event, which was a workshop, and getting, you know, involved in the art making process. So that capacity building as well was important. And then also getting council and also our funding bodies to kind of see what we were doing as well. So those partnerships to get an event like this off the ground are important too, because you do, one of the speakers said before, there has to be money that has to make these things happen, especially when it's a free event. But I think the big thing about public space is that it democratizes the public space, and the stories are already there. People make meaning and bring their ideas about a space. You know, we have a mall here called Bell Street Mall, and it's a dead space, and historically, you know, people say don't go out there at night, or, you know, because of the different buildings that have been there in the past, people have layered, you know, their idea of what that could be. But for example, in our first year of the festival, we commissioned a local artist who'd kind of traveled abroad and got some experience to come back and activate that space. And I remember talking to a business owner for just the festival that's gone, and she was saying that she'd never seen that space with so many people. And so that's the kind of feedback that you want, I suppose, and that buy-in as well, so that people own.
So it's changing the narrative of that space.
Absolutely, well. Yeah. And allowing people to also imagine that the space doesn't just have to be confined by historically what it was meant to be, but also that regional areas and towns and cities are changing by nature of migration. You know, we've got some fantastically rich and diverse communities that are emerging, and those communities need to interact in those spaces too. And I think culturally, we've often in a regional area been really blessed to have big spaces in terms of the houses and backyards. So going into the public space might not always be in our radar, but as we continue to grow, we're going to have to think about how we engage people who don't live in those big houses.
That's it. So when you're planning these kind of events, who are the important people or groups to get involved in something like this?
Yeah, there's a massive relational factor that has to go into this. And I think that idea of community really is what makes Lit Festival, I suppose. So I think without the tribe that kind of get that idea, then you are really kind of pushing an uphill battle to try and convince people. And I think even more strategically, you need to find people who can also get that idea, but also have that skill set. You know, so I have an amazing person who does all my council permits and all of that stuff that makes my eyes roll back in my head. So to do that paperwork, Lara worked on the second range crossing. She was across all of that risk management stuff that, you know, to get a public festival happening, you know, you need to find those cheerleaders in the community who are going to support you. And, you know, our librarian, our youth librarian here at City Library was one of our champions. We also, in previous years, had the local history librarian come on board for some of that archival material, and then partnerships as well in the community that are going to give you in-kind support, but also supplement the grants that you have. So our local massive shopping centre was able to facilitate the exhibiting of Amanda Parra, her big inflatable rabbits this year. So, you know, there's a lot of strategy, but also all the skills that you need are in your community, and in a regional context, sometimes it's just 1 or 2 steps removed. So that's what also makes it maybe a little bit easier.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So I also have Josh here with me in Toowoomba. Josh, you're a singer-songwriter and performer. So how do you contribute to identity of place?
Well, yeah, that's pretty much I feel like everything I do have been doing for the past 10 years. I started, it's nearly 10 years ago now, I started up Small Town Culture, and that was all about collaborating with school students mainly, but locals and communities to write songs about them. So they would tell me, it was generally starting at school, and they'd tell me about who they are, and kids are very enthusiastic to tell me about their life. I think that's the best part about my job. And then the adults would generally cross-check facts. So it wasn't all talking about fabricating a good story. Kids can do that. And sometimes we keep those little sort of, as long as they're not too far from the truth, those little interpretations of what the community is in there. And so generally write a song about the school, and it becomes a school song or a town song sometimes, or a bit of both if there's only one school in the town, which is a lot the case in a lot of places I go to. And then we create a music video, and the really fun side, the kids get to, after they've done the hard work of songwriting, which it is once they're a couple of hours into it, they realise it seemed fun, and then they got to do the hard work. But then we're at their end, they're so excited, and they get to become recording stars and sing their song. The locals sing the song that we wrote about them, and they're the stars of the video clip, and they get to show the rest of Australia or the world on YouTube and Facebook who they are, where they're from, which is what I obviously can relate to because I was brought up in a small town, and I would have loved that opportunity when I was a kid. You know?
So do you find there's a distinct character for every regional town that you've worked in?
Oh, for sure, yeah. It's interesting because there's a distinct character in each place, and I can definitely sort of feel that in every place I go to. But there's a common thread as well, which is something I love about a lot of small towns in Australia. I just feel that commonality, and that's why when we put the stuff up online, people love watching each other's videos and hearing each other's stories and songs from other towns, because they relate to what each other's doing and who they are.
So within that process, how do you bring those stories out? Do you think it's your personality, or do you have a set way of actually developing that content and that goes into the songs?
I'm pretty lucky these days. Like early on, it took a bit more work when I guess people, a lot of kids hadn't or didn't know what I was doing and who I was, and I sort of had to earn their trust. I had to sing them maybe other songs that I've written with other in other communities with other schools. But luckily, what's happened now is I go into a school or a community and they've seen, like, you know, some of the kids, I swear, have stayed up all night every night and watched 100 small town culture YouTube videos, and there's like 250. And so they sort of know what's coming, and they've already, it's great. It's the great thing about social media and YouTube, that they're ready to go because they go, well, that's their story. We want to tell you our story, and ours is going to be better than theirs. Yeah. And I'm like, well, you know, let's just, you know, but I love that spirit and energy.
Yeah, and the fact that they can actually identify that just from watching what's been done previously, they're ready to roll.
Yeah.
As soon as you're in the door. So you said you've got about 250 videos. I
think so, yeah.
So how far and wide have you gone with those?
So I haven't done a video in Tasmania, but I did some workshops and did some songwriting down there with some schools. But been as far as down on the Murray River in a beautiful town of Renmark, and as far north as Cairns and the Tablelands. Yep. And then as far west, I guess, the Northern Territory, little Aboriginal community called in Blooderwich. Yep. In the Northern Territory. So,
wow.
So it's been it's pretty diverse too. Yep. And actually, I've got to say Delhi. I got to do a job in Delhi.
In India.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what was that as an experience?
Well, thankfully, and I say thankfully because there was real language barriers. So we weren't songwriting, but it was more. I was working with CQ University, and they were. I was doing a whole heap of videos and songs to help, you know, represent who they were in each town. And they said, look, would you go to Delhi, because they sponsored a couple of orphanages. They sponsor a couple of orphanages over there, and really it was about me just going there, singing with the kids, but capturing on film, you know, a bit about their stories. And we interviewed a few of the kids and what they've achieved with the help of CQ Uni and their education. So it was great.
Yeah, that's amazing. So the people you work with, do you think that they have a united feeling about their place then? So going through that process, so obviously the kids.
Yeah, they do. No, and the parents and the communities do. But I do find that the other really nice thing is there's a couple of things I found in a couple of towns where maybe that spirit isn't as evident, and the love of their town or community isn't as evident. Sometimes it's really nice to see by the end of the project, they actually, a couple of kids that weren't enthusiastic, they're actually like, no, this place is actually all right, and I'm feeling really proud of where I'm from. And the other thing is, some small towns, even though they're a really small town, can be massive divides, and I just feel like music brings people together in a wonderful way. You get kids singing together, and because you know, there's sometimes well, I'm from a small town, so I guess I can say, you know, there's townies, there's cockies, there's, you know, and there's all these divides often, and sometimes there's Indigenous, non-Indigenous divides. There might be other nationalities there, and whether we like it or not, they don't always just gel. But when we make music, it's a natural way. Like sport, it brings people together.
Yeah, it's a universal language as such. Yeah. No, that sounds amazing. You must enjoy what you're doing to still be going through that process. And yeah. Look, I love it, and because I'd have to love it, because generally at the end of a week I collapse when I get home. It'd be exhausting.
So yeah, because you're wrapping everyone up, and but yeah, I do love it. So I'm ready to go again Monday the next week. So, yeah.
Oh, awesome. Oh, and obviously you've been sort of off the road for the last couple of months. So yeah,
it's been killing me. I miss people. And that's what it's all about, just interacting and talking to people. And I miss it badly. But I got to head on the road a week and a half ago, and there's a lot more coming up between now and the end of the year.
Yeah, so Josh is going to stay with us and actually perform for us at the end of the night. At each arts dinner, we also showcase some of our local artists, and for this month's dinner on fabrication and placemaking, tonight we're showcasing the work of Roots and Miracle, which is a Toowoomba-based business. They're a family-owned and operated business committed to bringing products designed to capture the essence of the Australian landscape. For more than 65,000 years, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have successfully and sustainably navigated these lands and waters, developing deep and complex relationships with all living things. Each of our products are embedded with this particular concept of Indigenous worldview, relativity and interconnectivity. Roots and Miracle are incredibly proud to carry on this legacy and hope that you'll be a part of their journey, locating, reviving, strengthening and sharing in this knowledge and timeless wisdom. So you can see here the beautiful neck earrings and combs, and if you head on to their website, which we showed just before, you'll see all the other amazing stuff that they're creating. Back to you, Bron.
That's really interesting, Michelle. They're online, so I'm going to go and check them out, and I think that's a great idea for artists who are selling their work. Before I go to a question around that sort of physical versus virtual space, I've got a question from the audience for John Mongard. So John, are you there?
Yes.
Okay, so the question is, along with the other Mananjali and wider nation stories that will be incorporated into the town centre at redevelopment here in Beaudesert, will you be using Yugambeh naming with English perhaps for objects, directions, etc.?
Yeah, well, Beaudesert, out of the 3 townships that we worked on for the council as part of a regeneration placemaking project, was the most difficult one because it's actually lost a lot of its place character. And but historically, ancient times, it was a crossroads for different groups, Indigenous groups, and is a place of meeting of different tribes and groups. So the place that we're revitalising, I guess, is next to the council chambers, which is on the main street, and I'm hoping that will be recreated into a kind of a gateway that reflects those crossroads, and that those stories might be brought out into the space. So there's one of the ideas is this kind of amorphous or organic amphitheatre that will create gathering places, and I think that we can bed into the walls there dual language bits of text or stories, multiple language stories, maybe in English and Indigenous language, and try to capture the fact that Beaudesert is a very strong place for Indigenous people.
That's great. Thanks for that, John. I've got another question for Daniel, and possibly Ben Tupas might have some thoughts about this as well. We know more and more artists are using the online space for showing and selling their art. Are physical spaces now not important for the artist, and is the virtual world the new frontier?
I kind of wonder whether the new virtual world is a new frontier, or whether it's another channel. I think we always think about social media, we talk about Facebook and Instagram and websites as channels, but so is a physical space. Physical space is a channel with its own unique offerings, its own unique prospects that cannot be replicated online. Like a sense of scale, a sense of sound, a sense of physicality is stuff that you would have to slave to actually be able to translate into a virtual experience. But when you have it in situ, in space, in a real world, it's communicated effectively. So I think it's just like every other channel we use, but how do we use it as a channel with all the other channels? How do we emphasize and capitalize on what a physical space offers us and what virtual space offers us, so that we can provide the best opportunity for the work? And that's what it comes down to, I suppose. The work is, some work will always be amazing in physical, but some work only exists online. It only exists in a virtual space, and we start to see work that has been created specifically for virtual that has no physical body to it, which has been happening for decades and decades and decades. I'm not saying it's new, but I think as we get into the more digital space, it becomes more ephemeral. And what does that mean, and how do we translate? And then what does virtual mean in a physical space is probably the flip side of the question, which I think gets asked a lot less. I think, I think it's a brave new world, but it's also a brave new world that doesn't abandon what comes before it.
Thank you. And now we might go to Michelle. I think she's got some questions as well.
Rightio. Thanks, Bron. So there are more virtual spaces, and so this one's actually a question for John Mongard. You there, John?
I'm here.
My fingers are very cold. Sorry. So there are more virtual spaces and ways to reach a much wider market, but how does this affect our places? So really, what's the future for our our high streets and our town centres if everything goes virtual, or a majority of everything goes virtual?
Well, I don't think it will, because we're social beings, and we really have to get out and talk to people and see them, and Zoom doesn't really cut the mustard in the long term. We want to be in place, and that's how we make place, by sharing it. So that something I try and sort of facilitate is to make different types of gathering places in projects, so that you can gather in different size groups, little groups or big groups, but also event spaces, because events are part of the life of our communities, and we will find ways to work around COVID, and we have to, it's too boring in your pajamas at home.
And considering, I mean, we've seen a bit of a collapse even within our retail sector, because that face-to-face is being taken over by online. So it's obviously so important for us to be really cognizant of our place, that it brings people out and engages in that more personal way.
Yeah, look, there's going to be a depression, economic depression, created by COVID, and that's coming in the next year. And so a lot of Main Street businesses will suffer in towns of all sizes all around Australia. And we have to get out there and support those local businesses. We should not be buying online when we can buy locally, because all we're doing is killing off our main streets. So, it's our duty to our community to support the people that provide services, and that's everyone from, people who make food, to provide services, to create objects for art. And we have to go local. This is the COVID challenge, to go local. It's the only future for a lot of centres, because they're going to struggle.
So we need to fly that banner and make sure that we're promoting our neighbours as such.
I agree. Yeah.
Yep.
So I might ask a question for anyone in the group, anyone on the panel. How do we encourage more artistic engagement with our places and built environments? Has anyone got any thoughts on that?
I think when we're designing processes, is designing processes that invite people into the conversation, that use language and examples that are inclusive. And sometimes there's a lot of opportunity to make those people that work in the creative industries to feel valued in their community, where at the moment there could be a chance they feel undervalued. So how do we create those how do we connect how do we create broader community around creative practice in communities it's an ongoing question.
It's about making those connections and having those safe conversations as well. So the relationships that you're building aren't always outcome based too. I think there's a lot of pressure on people to have conversations that are outcome based, instead of it just being a general conversation, getting to know people and connecting people within community as well. I think that's really important too.
Sometimes you're dealing with people who don't know what the outcome looks like yet. They don't even have a language or context to imagine what that outcome could be. So how do we have those conversations that transition people from a sense of being disempowered to being empowered to believe that they can achieve an outcome? They take ownership of that outcome and their spaces and their environments, not feel alienated and separated from them.
I think that goes to one of the other questions that I had was, how do we get ownership of our design places by our communities? And what you're describing is by ensuring that there are processes where people can actually interact and have their say and be part of the making, I guess.
Yeah, I've always, the places that like when I've worked with communities, you can see when they take ownership. You can feel it. And ironically, if you've done your job well in working with community to take ownership of space, you should feel alienated from that community by the end of it. Because sometimes as the external coming in to facilitate, you've done your job well, they're going to look at you in the end and go, why are you here? Why are you still here? Your job is done. Move on. And sometimes you're even a reminder that they at some point weren't empowered to do that. You're a reminder of the disempowerment and a reminder that they didn't have ownership. And that's that point of realizing, of stepping back and going, okay, I understand now. I understand my role as the facilitator and not getting so deeply enmeshed in it sometimes.
Michelle, what do you think?
Oh, there's so many opportunities for including community from, with my local government background, having that initial conversation from the first inception of the idea, instead of it being that tokenistic, oh, do you agree with what we've decided? Those conversations need to start a lot earlier, and that takes time, and that takes someone with a special skill of building those relationships and building that trust as well. It's so important.
Indeed. So I think that goes to the issue of trust, moving a little bit back to the artists and working with the fabricators or agreements on public art. How can we check that our agreements and that our partnerships are fair to all parties? Ben, you've probably had quite a lot of agreements with artists over the time. What do you do to make sure that it's fair to everybody and everyone knows what's expected of them?
Yeah, I think it's important to allow the artist and the community to be part of that process. So it's not do the placemaking project to this community, it's allowing them to inhabit and play an important role down to the exhibiting of their work, if that's what it is. But I think it's, allowing that voice to be reflected, but also to ask, who's missing in this process and who can I allow to lean in because they actually have that local knowledge that has always existed. I don't need to bring in someone who has that perceived knowledge, like the knowledge might actually already exist here. It's just tapping into that and being open to, sharing that power.
Mm-hmm. And another question, I guess, and Jen, you probably had an experience of this when you were doing your piece about the two rivers. Sometimes when we're telling stories with community, the stories are not always comfortable, are they? So how do we tell difficult stories? Does anyone have any thoughts about that?
I suppose it's figuring out whose story it is to tell and what role do we play in the telling of that story. It can, I think we've all made the mistake in our career where we're with good intentions, taken someone else's story and told it for them. Whereas I think they eventually realize it's about how do you empower other people to tell those stories? How do you create a safe environment in which a hard conversation or a difficult story can unfold in a respectful manner that's safe for everyone involved, and not just safe for the person telling the story, are safe for the people receiving the story. Because I think their safety is as important as anyone else's safety. There's like, you know, if you're looking in like a performative context, you go to an open mic night and you see someone telling a very raw story that's not safe for the audience to be listening to. It's too raw, too naked. And how can you help that? Like from a dramaturgical perspective, which applies to placemaking, is how can you help that person tell that story? How can you provide them with a tool set to tell the story? How can you empower them to tell it in a way that the story will be heard as they intend it to be heard, as they want it to be heard? Because sometimes we can be so close to the story that it's too confrontational, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It really does. Wow, some amazing conversations tonight. And just to remind everybody that very shortly this will be up on YouTube on the Live at the Centre probably tomorrow, but tonight at the Arts Front website. So you'll be able to see this afterwards. And we're working towards getting transcripts of all our arts dinners online available for you to read as well. So encourage you to share this with others, because there's been some real gems in this. I'd like to flick back to Michelle, who is going to go to Josh Arnold on stage.
So welcome back, everybody. Let's welcome Josh Arnold. He's going to perform a couple of songs for us tonight on one of the many that he's created over the last however many years with our local communities. So take it away, Josh.
Thank you. I had to sort of look through my song list for this because I didn't want to sing a song or a couple of songs that were specific for communities. So there's a song I wrote recently which was for a collaboration with the National Rural Health Alliance and really around mental health in regional areas. So what I did is got ideas on Facebook and via email from anyone from across Australia to contribute to this song. But I had to, whenever I write a song, there's got to be a core idea and a core sort of sometimes just a light bulb moment that gets the song moving. And there's a lady from out near where I live who owns a corner store at a little town called The Gums, and she really said that, hit it on the head and got this moving by telling me her story about how she likes to keep people positive, and she feels like she wanted to shut down during the height of the panic around the pandemic, and she decided to keep her doors open even with all the fear and some health concerns in her family, because she was a shoulder to lean on in the community, not just a place where people would get their necessities. And she felt it was her role to build people up, so anyone that walked into her store when they left her store, to make them feel better. So that got the ball rolling, and a lot of these lines are just lines from people who contributed. It's called Build 'Em Up. Out on the highway, there's a little corner store. If not for the locals there, she'd be shutting her doors. She's seen grown men cry from putting down stock for generations, all but lost. Now there's fear, thought things couldn't get more tough. Can we get through this? Are we strong enough? I think it's time for the little people to make their mark. I think it's time to come together and be the spark. Yeah, be the spark and build them up from the ground up. Don't lose heart, don't lose touch. Build them up, stay in the fight. Gotta keep the hope in the country alive. Let's take a deep breath and we will survive. watch from the sidelines. I've watched hearts break, seeing tears form channels in the dust, along the lines in the cracks of a face. Still the magpies sing, and day follows night. In the wake of nature's fury, we can pick up our lives, yeah, pick up our lives and build them up from the ground up. Don't lose heart, don't lose touch. Build them up to stay in the fight. Gotta keep the hope in the country alive. Let's take a deep breath, and we will survive. Survive, survive. And build them up from the ground up. Don't lose heart, don't lose touch. Build them up to stay in the fight. Gotta keep the hope in the country alive. Thank you. I said I needed like 2 people to clap here. Because I've been doing a few backyard concerts on Facebook, and it's very weird with no interaction. But I'm just learning to get used to it. It's going to be a buzz when, you know, I finally go somewhere and 10 people clap or something. Now this one's special to me. As I said, I was brought up in a small town. The town's called Tara, and Tara's, you know, I'll be honest, gets a pretty bad rap, and you know, it's always been considered a pretty tough town, and yeah, there's a lot of issues there. There's a lot of problems with youth, and I've done a lot of work with the kids out there, and obviously being brought up there, I feel a really close connection with those kids, and I wrote this song with a group of teenagers. And really, it's for them to feel empowered, talking about empowerment, to feel that because sometimes they feel like, and a lot of people feel like if they live in a small town or in an isolated area, they are not going to have the same opportunities as everyone else. And this is really a song about saying, if you live in a small town, or if you live in a town that's, you know, does get a bad rap, you can do anything you want to do. And I know it's a cliche to say you can achieve anything if you believe it, but I really wanted to instill that in them, because I really believe they can. And so this one, I guess, is sung from the point of view of me, a Tara boy, but is going to be hopefully recorded with these guys had a trip planned to Brisbane to the studio to record this song in April, and that got cancelled. So we're hoping at some point we can find the funds and get to do this again. This is called Where I Stand. Unmoved like the brigalow tree, I will hold my ground. Everything that I'll ever need's inside me now. When I take that step and feel alone, I won't forget this is my home. From where I stand, I can reach the sky. From where I stand, I can learn to fly. And where I stand is where I'm meant to be, taking on the world. This is me. I'm a kid who's grown up tough in a small town. Out here in Tara, gotta live my life and be proud. Take a chance, I could rise or I could fall. Stay true to myself and give it all. From where I stand, I can reach the sky. From where I stand, I can learn to fly. From where I stand is where I'm meant to be. Strong and free, spread my wings, it's up to me. It's not just a dream if you can see it. It's not just a dream if you can feel it. From where I stand, I can reach the sky. From where I stand, I can learn to fly. From where I stand is where I'm meant to be. Taking on the world. This is me. Taking on the world. This is me. Go the Tara Panthers. Now, just quickly before I go, for anyone from Bow Desert, I presume there's a few Bow Desert people here. Yeah. There's going to be a special song for the rugby league team I'm writing with. I'm sure you all know the G family out there, and especially Keith G. So he's one of the instigators here. So I co-write with a local Bow Desert rugby league legend. Will be coming up soon. So yeah, later in the year. Thank you.
That's fantastic. We look forward to seeing you.
Yeah, I look forward to it.
Great. Okay, well, thanks very much for staying with us. I mean, it's been a great panel tonight. Thank you to everybody who's been participating tonight. Thank you, Michelle, for being my co-host. Thank you to all the crew here at Bow Desert, behind the scenes, my crew at Scenic Rim Regional Council, all the crew out at the Empire Theatre, Arts Front, Brown Velvet Cinema. A special big thanks to Regional Arts Service Network, Southwest Queensland, for their support. And last but not least, thank you for the audience for making this happen. And we hope to see you next month on Tuesday, the 28th of July, when we're talking about cultural tourism now. Thank you again. Don't forget, you can see this again on YouTube Live and also live at the centre. And we look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you, everybody.